Hi, I'm Wayne, co-founder of Tierion, and I'm here with Alex Colavin, co-founder and tech lead of Jungla, a genetic evidence company, and we're going to talk today about how they use Chainpoint. Thanks for joining me, Alex.
Sure, thanks for the invite.
Can you tell us a little bit about your company?
Sure. So, in a sentence, we work in a clinical genetic space, building a platform to deliver evidence to help with variant interpretation. I think generally, one of the things we've seen over the last few years is clinical genetics has grown tremendously. So it's not just ancestry tests and 23andMe, but also tests to help make important decisions about your healthcare, your prognosis, your diagnosis, things like that. So these tests are really important for determining what kind of treatments you need for treating your cancer, et cetera. And the only reason, or the main reason these tests work is because we can associate specific variants with specific outcomes. But one of the growing problems in clinical genetics is that most variants don't have strong associations with outcomes. And to deal with this problem, clinical genetic tests hire highly trained scientists to go through the literature and try and determine what those associations are with the mutations in your genome. And this is true even for really well-studied genes. And it's a problem that's not going away anytime soon. So we started as 3 scientists from Stanford trying to generate evidence proactively for all of those mutations using experimental and computational methods at scale and delivering those insights from that evidence to clinical genetic test providers.
Mm-hmm. So you're collecting evidence about these genetic indicators and making predictions about that. So how is it that you found out about Tierion, and how is it you're using Chainpoint?
So our evidence works best when these clinical geneticists trust it. And I think there's a healthy amount of skepticism when it comes to new evidence in clinical genetics. These machine learning models and experiments that we're generating, they're not just trying to predict what app you're most likely to click on. They're making decisions about your health. And there's dozens of computational predictors that have been published in the last decade that all claim to be the best. And so comparing these existing solutions and understanding which ones work well is a big challenge. Not only that, but the scope of knowledge is also changing. So every month, new variants are associated with new outcomes. And so how do you know that evidence doesn't just capture the state of knowledge today? How do you know that it tracks well as the scientific consensus for how disease works grows? And so to help build that trust, we have kind of a 2-tier approach. The first is we go for quality over quantity. So instead of making an interpretation for every variant in the genome, we actually only release those pieces of evidence that we deem to be of high enough quality internally to our clients. And the other step is we actually, every month, every time we regenerate and reassess all of our evidence, we anchor that evidence to the blockchain using the hash API. And as new evidence comes out, we can allow third-party auditors to look at the evidence that we anchored to the blockchain and show that our prospective performance meets whatever criteria is necessary.
Very cool. Can you tell us a little bit more about who these auditors might be and what the real value proposition of being able to prove the integrity and timestamp of all the evidence and predictions that you're generating?
So the auditors presumably would be our clients, the people with whom we want to build trust. And the value is being able to prove that our interpretations were made without the existence, without the foreknowledge of the variants that have come out since the timestamp of the anchor with our data.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that we've seen with other companies is that in clinical trials and in collection of healthcare data, there's generally a heightened level of skepticism ever since Theranos happened, where people are saying, oh, now, if Theranos got in trouble in part because they were manipulating or massaging their clinical trial data, we need to be able to prove things in a way that has a higher standard. So it's interesting to listen to you and hear that that's something that you're actually finding relevant to your customers and the people that you interact with today. Who are some of your customers? What kind of companies use your service?
So right now, we're working with clinical genetic test providers. So some big names include Ambry, Invitae, Council, um, and I think that's the direction that we're focusing on right now. But the molecular evidence platform that we're building ultimately is trying to understand something about how molecules and mutations in those molecules drive diseases or drive outcomes. And that's relevant in many aspects of clinical genetics, including situations where you want to try and distinguish patients that are more or less likely to respond to a clinical trial, or other pharmacological contexts. And so really, I think we're trying to build out the knowledge for understanding how diseases work at a molecular level.
Interesting. With before we were chatting before we started this discussion, you said you were telling me a little bit about your implementation. You're working with the technology. Can you share some of that?
Sure. I think there's kind of two fun aspects to how we use the Hash API to make our proofs. The first is actually we didn't start with a Hash API. We actually started with Twitter because we were bioscientists and we didn't know how to anchor our data to the blockchain. Of course, there's a lot of things wrong with trying to use Twitter for timestamping. For example, Twitter might go out of business, or Twitter might enable editing old tweets, or we might want to delete the tweets that didn't have predictions that ended up being correct. And so by working with the blockchain, ultimately that kind of solves all of those issues. And my co-founder, Carlos, found Tierion and found the Hash API. And actually implementing the Hash API ended up being pretty straightforward and actually easier than the Twitter API. And fewer limitations, actually.
Cool. For some of the developers and highly technical people, can you talk a little bit about the specific manner in which you're constructing Merkle trees for all the evidence and then eventually anchoring it to the blockchain using Chainpoint?
Sure. So when we want to enable third-party auditors, we want to reveal just the information necessary so that they can confirm our proof for our prospective performance. We don't want to reveal all the mutation predictions that we've ever made. So to do that, we actually construct Merkle trees internally where each leaf is a prediction for a specific variant. And then we actually limit the depth of the tree so that the number of possible combinations of predictions that we make isn't infinite, right? So we limit the number of possible predictions that we can make to further prove to our clients that we're really just making the predictions that we're releasing to them. And at the end of the day, we just pass our API token with the root of our internal Merkle tree to the Hash API, and the rest is history.
So tell us what's next for your business.
So at this point, we've spent 2 years building out the molecular evidence platform, and we're excited to see it put to use. So we're working with partners in clinical genetics to try and implement our platform as part of their variant interpretation pipeline, and hopefully make an impact on patient care.
All right. Excellent, Alex. Well, thanks for sharing how you guys use Chainpoint. It's really interesting for me to learn about all these different use cases, because when we first created this technology, we had no idea how people would use it, and certainly using it for making predictions for genetics and genetic evidence isn't something we had anticipated. So it's very exciting to hear about that. So thanks very much. Appreciate your time today.
Thanks.